Black Power, this is Kofi Taharka. I have the privilege, the honor, and the responsibility of being the national chairman of the National Black United Front. You know, we have the 27th annual Sankofa Caravan to the Ancestors coming up on October the 18th and 19th in Houston, Texas, and in Galveston, Texas. Today, with Black Guerrilla Media from the front line, we have who is going to be a special guest this year. It is Brother Kamau Sadiki. He is a member of the board of directors and a lead instructor for Diving with a Purpose. He's a certified professional by the Association of Dive Instructors as a dive master with over 1,500 open water scuba dives. He is featured in the National Geographic magazine and podcast entitled Into the Depths. He has worked on underwater documentation of 5 shipwrecks involved in the transatlantic area of African enslavement. Let me say that again. The transatlantic era of African enslavement. The acronym is TEAE. We might be referencing that as we go through our talk. He is one of only 3 people of African ancestry to actually go in the cargo hold of a ship that enslaved African people. He's featured in the Netflix documentary Descendant, which is the story of one of the shipwrecks called the Clotilda, and that is dealing with Africatown, which is near Mobile, Alabama. Some of us are familiar with the great work Barracoon by the ancestor Zora Neale Hurston that tells that story. There's a tremendous documentary called Descendant. He also has done dives and lectures throughout the world in America, Africa, the Caribbean, with shipwrecks, and in Europe doing lectures. He is the recipient of numerous awards, and he makes this connection for us, sisters and brothers, of ancestral memory. Brother Kamau, welcome to the show, brother.
Yeah, well, thank you, Brother Kofi. It's really a great honor and a pleasure actually to be here.
Good. First, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. I was reading your bio and it's very, very impressive. You have all of the credentials and everything that sometimes we don't see, or we don't get to the opportunity to interface with people in our community as much with these type
Mhm.
of experiences. But just tell me a little bit about, where did you grow up? Where you from? Like, where your people from, bro?
Yeah, my folks are from down south, man, and yeah, I was born and raised actually in South Carolina, believe it or not,
Wow.
and I was well rooted and grounded there. My dad has made his transition, but my mother is still with us. She's 95 years old, and she was critically important in instilling some real important values in me and keeping me connected to the greater outdoors. She's very religious, as most of our elders are, but she was very sensitive to the outdoors. And so coming up, I was always outside camping. I learned to swim at a very early age, which is critically important. We can talk more about that later. And so that exposure, I think, Brother Kofi, kind of began the nurturing for me to stay connected to probably the most extraordinary power on earth, that is the interconnectivity of us as human beings and the natural world.
Mm.
Um, I mean, the outdoors is my sanctuary, right? That's where I go to quote worship, if you will.
Mm.
So, so that upbringing again was very, very important. See, kind of also instilled in me the importance of, if you learn something, nobody can take that away from you. And it's up to you to use the power of that knowledge, to improve the quality of your own life and the quality of humanity, and particularly to, do something about, our people and the condition that our people currently exist in, and make sure that, never again our humanity is violated in such a way that it was violated during the period of transatlantic era of African enslavement. So I appreciate that Southern sort of upbringing, And
Yes.
later on, I did join the military, put 3 years in there, got out of there as quickly as I could, and went on to school at Howard University, studied engineering, practiced engineering, and retired in 2017, and got involved in scuba diving, well, maybe 20 years ago or so. And once I retired, I started engaging in this critical work that is raising the voices of our ancestors from the seafloor and these shipwrecks all over the world. I mean, that's we can talk about this a bit later, but some 12,000 ships that was involved in the enslavement of our people, 12,000, right? But we only know about 15 or so. You know, if I say to you, brother, the Pina, the Santa Maria, the Nina, I'm sure people can relate to those names because of the way colonizers has conditioned our educational process. But if I say the Merriman, the Guerrero, the South Jose Paquette, the Africa, you're wondering what I'm talking about, right? Because that information has been suppressed. So out of those 12,000 vessels, we only know about 15 of them. And each one of those vessels, 12,000 of those vessels had our ancestors on them, and each one of them have an incredible story to tell. So we're shifting the narrative, if you will. We're decolonizing the whole thought process and thinking and conceptualization what the so-called enslavement of our people meant.
Mm.
And what's a centerpiece of that, and I'll talk more about this when I come share some time and energy with you all. It's critically important for us to remember, and again, it connects to my upbringing as well. Um, we have been talked about, we talk about this period of the transatlantic slave trade and so forth and so on. But we have to remember that our ancestors was never slaves. They were never slaves. They fought, they resisted on the continent of Africa, they resisted being forced to the coastline, they resisted in the small boats coming from the coastline to the big ship, they resisted on the big ships, and they resisted when they got to Cuba, the Americas, Brazil, and so forth. And they continued to resist. So they were never slaves, they were enslaved. And they was always struggling and fighting, to retain their humanity, who they were as human beings. So I guess my mom, kind of looping back to your question, yeah, my mom sort of instilled in me that never let anyone violate, who you are. You find out who you are, right?
Mm.
And never let anyone violate that. And so I appreciate that upbringing so much. And there was other folks in the community that assisted in that process, that even wasn't even related to my family. There was folks in the community that um, took me basically through manhood training. Back then, I kind of came up through the Boy Scouts, segregated Boy Scouts, and I credit my scout master, if you will, at the time, elderly gentleman. I stayed with him for about 8 years, from my formative years, from 10 to about 18, and he really instilled some very powerful values in me that made me who I am today. So.
For point of clarity, Brother Kamau, did you say you went to Howard or Harvard?
That is a key point of clarity.
Mhm.
Yes, I went to Howard University,
Okay.
the probably the number one HU,
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Okay.
went to
All right.
Howard University for studying engineering there. Actually, after I got out of the military, there's a little small story here. I was barely got out of that space because I was headed straight for the stockade. But anyway, that's another story.
Hmm.
Um, but I was able to escape. I got out, right? And then I was really fired up to really study hard, right? And so I went to a junior college, and I got, in terms of grade point averages, 4.0 there, and that was recognized. And so they gave me a full scholarship to go to any engineering school of my choice. So I got admitted to Georgia Institute of Technology, Clemson University. I think MIT was on the list. I think University of Virginia, Howard University, and Clark, Atlanta. So I say, forget all of them. I'm going to Howard.
All
And
right.
so that's
Right.
kind of the
Right.
best decision I made. So
So you kind of touched on it a little bit. You say you had a career in engineering, you got this foundation in South Carolina, and
Mhm.
then you went to Howard. I probably could do a whole show about your time on Howard, but I'm gonna move past
Sure.
that to you know you are intrigued or being outdoors. You learned how to swim at a young age. How did you get into diving specifically, scuba diving
Sure.
specifically?
Yeah, that's a very good question because you don't just get into this sort of space scuba diving it is. Um, when I was working as an engineer, Brother Kofi, I had a responsibility um, to manage, if you will, all the hydropower resources of this country. That's some 21,000 megawatts, a huge budget, almost 300 million. Um, so I was traveling a lot all over the country. And so back around 2000, early 2000s, I was coming through Dallas, Fort Worth Airport, coming back to DC. And at the gate, when I got to gate to come back to DC, there was an elderly gentleman there, and he was completely exhausted. He was bent over, nodding. But what struck me, they had all these patches on his jacket, places all over the world. They were dive patches. And on that particular trip, I had taken a book with me to read, and it's called Spirit Dive. And it's about the enslavement vessel called the Henrietta Marie. A very powerful reading. And so when I got to my seat, I kind of sat a couple of seats away from him. I noticed that on his shoulder patch, it said Henrietta Marie. I said, oh, wow, that's coincidental. And so anyway, he came out of his nod and I edged up close and struck up a conversation. Uh, this brother, his name is Dr. Albert Jose Jones. He's considered now the godfather of black scuba diving in general, you know, to kind of put him into context, if you can, if you will. I'm sure you heard of Jacques Cousteau. Well,
Yes.
Jacques Cousteau is the white Dr. Jones, if you will.
Hmm.
So this brother has done some incredible things. Matter of fact, Netflix have just produced uh, a documentary on his life and legacy called The Black Godfather of Scuba Diving. He's about 94 years old now, still very cognitive and so forth. Um, so I struck up this conversation. He was very gracious, gave me a lot of material he was carrying with him. And he said, are you interested in learning how to scuba dive? I said, sure, I've always wanted to do it, but never had the time. He said, your timing is immaculate. We're starting our training in a couple of weeks. I said, wow, sure. Come check us out at the high school. We start out in swimming pools in this training. And so, I did. And the rest is sort of history. So Dr. Jones, a little bit more about Dr. Jones. He started scuba diving in 1956. Imagine a black person of African descent during that time period, trying to engage in this activity. So there was the racism and all that raised his head. So in 1959, he said, forget y'all. I'm establishing my own scuba club. And so he founded the oldest, probably scuba club, if not the black scuba club for sure, but scuba club period in 1959 called the Underwater Adventure Seekers. We just celebrated the 65th anniversary of that club. I'm a member of that club.
Wow.
And
Wow.
Dr. Jones, he taught me how to scuba dive. He's trained literally thousands of black folk how to scuba dive, and haven't charged them one red
Mm.
penny, because he wanted to get more people of African descent in this activity and do this critical work. And the reason I'm engaged in underwater archaeology now is because of Dr. Jones. We can talk about that a little bit.